Welcome to In Dark Places. Anything less would be uncivilized. This week, we're kicking off a brand new series. This is Our Haunted World, Chapter 1. Here's my friend Jimmy Haunted with some news.
This is your In Dark Places news correspondent, Mr. Haunted, with some breaking news. Well, apparently, there is a new dinosaur that has been discovered. A new species of dinosaur has been discovered in Missouri, and it's a find 80 years in the making. Paleontologists Gay Darrow and Mike Makovicki discovered both a juvenile and adult skeletons of a newly named Parasaurus missouriensis. They say it's a duck-billed dinosaur reaching up to 25 to 30 feet long, and it's never been found in the U.S. The dig site will remain a secret until it's secured. Makovicki, the curator of dinosaurs at Chicago's Field Museum, has been digging in Missouri for years. He said it's only a matter of time before even more dinosaurs are discovered there. Parasaurus missouriensis, as the species has been dubbed, was misidentified for decades based on a limited number of fossils found at the site. At one point, the creature was thought to be a type of long-necked dinosaur. Later, experts declared it was a species of dinosaur previously discovered in North Carolina. It wasn't clear what this thing was all the way up until recently, Darrow said. Parasaurus missouriensis was duck-billed and sported a spiked thumb on each hand, either for protection or mating. What kind of sick dinosaur if his female friend denied him relations? Hey, come back here, else I'm going to stick my spiked thumb in your neck. I don't know. Based on the skeletons recently pulled from the Chronister dig site, one adult and one juvenile, this beast would have been up to 30 feet long, weighing between 2 and 3 tons, Darrow said. And here's a fun fact dino tidbit I dug up for you. See what I did there? A recent poll says approximately 50% of those polled believe that dinosaurs still exist. And I think they do also. I think check into the Congo, people. Let's go on a field trip. Well, back to In Dark Places.
The alleged Sasquatch sighting in central Illinois adds to legendary creature's big year. You've probably seen the famous footage of Bigfoot, that grainy film from 1967, showing an ape-like creature ambling through the California woods, casting a brief, leisurely glance at the camera before disappearing off-screen. What an Illinois man saw last month was rather different. The creature he says he spotted outside the small town of Chandelorville, northwest of Springfield, was fast, athletic, and massive, covering a 2-lane road in 2 quick strides. It had incredibly long limbs and was covered in shiny black hair, the man said, and was gone almost before he could register what was happening. It jumped into the darkness, and I was kind of freaked out about it, said the man, 59-year-old engineer who lives in Peoria. The downstate engineer who says he spotted the mysterious figure last month asked not to be named after the initial report of his sighting, released without his knowledge, brought him a crush of unsought attention. I don't want to be known as Mr. Bigfoot, he said. He said he was driving home on Illinois Route 78 after visiting his mother when, just across the Sangamon River, he saw the creature bound across the road about 40 yards from his vehicle. It turned toward him just before it vanished, though he couldn't make out his eyes or face. The man said he is not a Bigfoot enthusiast and was sober as a judge when he had his sighting. He acknowledged, though, that when friends went back to look for tracks, they found nothing. But Paul Garber, a University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign anthropologist who studies primates, said that it is not supported by the fossil record. Gigantopithecus went extinct about 500,000 years ago, he said, and there's no evidence it ever made it here. So this guy is a party pooper. He said a large primate would leave telltale signs of its presence, from droppings to bones to the remnants of nests. Garber said tales of Bigfoot-like creatures exist all over the world, which he attributes to the human impulse to rationalize odd sights that defy ready explanation. I believe this guy saw something, he said. I just think the visual evidence alone is what we have. The other kind of physical evidence that would be consistent with ape behavior is what we tend not to have. Pressed about what he saw, the man said he thought it might have been a bear running at full tilt. But its bipedal gait and the lack of bear tracks convinced him otherwise. It resembled the classic image of Bigfoot, he said, and others who live in the area have since told him they've seen similar creatures. As for the possibility of a prankster, the man said he hoped it isn't true. If someone thinks I'm coming down to central Illinois to put a hoax on other people or something, I wouldn't recommend it. There's way too many hunters. There's too many people with guns. It will be too dangerous, he said.
Alright, so I have this story that I just came across that I was not familiar with. I'd like to share it with you guys. So, Tad Roberts stole 101 grams of lunar rocks from a NASA facility while interning with the American Space Organization in 2002, specifically to have relations on the moon. Let me explain. The moon rocks collected by Apollo astronauts are amongst the most valuable substances locked up in NASA's facility. Back in July 2002, a NASA intern decided to steal some moon rocks to have, quotation marks, relations on the moon. Tad Roberts, a promising intern at NASA, once hoped to be the first man on Mars. However, that dream was put aside after he noticed a sizable quantity of moon rocks being kept at NASA's lunar lab in Houston, Texas, under somewhat insecure conditions. Roberts came up with a plan to steal 101 grams of moon rocks, valued at some $21 million, so that he could literally give his girlfriend the moon. He wanted to lay the lunar samples out on a bed and, So Roberts and his girlfriend scattered the moon rocks on the bed and did what they were doing there. Now, if you remember Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie Bucket and Grandpa Joe stole fizzy lifting drinks, and they got into big trouble. There was a big brouhaha over this. Mr. Wonka came in there and scolded them in a brutal fashion, reminding them that the whole area now had to be sanitized, etc., etc. Well, little Tad Roberts got into even more trouble. According to the FBI's report on the Moonrock caper, the young thieves did more than just try to sell off a collection of lunar samples worth as much as $21 million. In the process, they also contaminated them, making them virtually useless to the scientific community. They also destroyed 3 decades worth of handwritten research notes by a NASA scientist that had been locked in a safe. So 3 NASA interns entered guilty pleas over this caper, and Roberts was sentenced to more than 8 years in prison for his role in the Moonrock caper, as well as a separate offense of stealing dinosaur bones from a museum in Utah. You gotta admit, if you're gonna steal stuff, make it cool stuff. Moon rocks and dinosaur bones? Oh, and there's more. Since this was back in 2002, Tad has served his time, and while in jail, Roberts studied for degrees in physics anthropology, and philosophy. Now 44, he has become a leading authority on the large-scale structure of the universe. Look at Tad go.
Thank you, Jimmy. This here is Our Haunted World, Chapter 1. So I got a story that I started to tell a couple episodes ago on our creepy childhood stories, but I was saving it for this one because it seemed to fit more. But way back on episode 1, I talked about how my family would go to Cowboy Lingo State Park in West Virginia here, and I saw a juvenile Bigfoot one time whenever I was with my uncle, and I was about 3 years old. And also right around that same time period, when I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was playing around in the driveway with my uncle, who was always accompanying us on these little trips, and we saw these two little kids about my age playing out in the creek. And the weird thing is, they looked kind of like me. When I was little, I had white hair, and these two boys also had white hair, and they were playing in the creek, and I think one of them even motioned for me to come to them, and I kept begging my uncle, I want to go play with those boys and junk like that, and he wouldn't let me. He said, no, let's just stay here. And from what I can remember, one of the boys was a little bit older than the other one, but they played in the creek about every day whenever we were on that little weekend getaway, and they would always just seem to disappear. We never saw them going into any of the cabins, or there was never any parents around them or anything. They would just be in the creek one minute, and the next minute they were gone. And we ended up seeing these kids a couple different trips out there. We possibly even saw them on that same weekend that I saw the juvenile Bigfoot. I can't remember for sure now, but I do remember we saw them on at least 2 different trips, and it was kind of weird. My uncle kind of laughed about it and said, oh, there's those boys again.
Saddle up, partners. We're going to take a ride to Tombstone, Arizona, and talk about Boot Hill Graveyard. In these modern times, death is portrayed as uncommon and tragic, often hidden from daily life. Contrast that to the rollicking days of the Wild West, where gunfights and hangings were common occurrences in the town square. And it's easy to see how a place like Boot Hill Graveyard would seem curious now. A rocky burying grounds atop of a hill in the historic Old West town of Tombstone, Arizona, Boot Hill Graveyard is a looking glass through which we can see a time and place where death came casually and sometimes even humorously. Weathered wooden signs mark the graves of about 250 men, women, and children who passed through Tombstone, mostly between 1879 and 1884. Although this cemetery and the town that surrounds it are now known as a tourist attraction due to their authentic Old West appeal, and because the town was the site of the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral, an interesting aspect of the town's history that isn't discussed much is the cemetery's integration of a variety of races and stations in life represented in the same cemetery. Cowboys, Chinese immigrants, South American immigrants, miners, slaves, business folk, soldiers, mothers, children, cattle ranchers, lawmen, and outlaws are all buried side by side in Boot Hill. Many of the graves are marked as unknown, miners and drifters whose names have been lost to time. Graves that have been marked mostly tell a blunt tale of how a person came to be deceased. Murdered, reads one in outraged capital letters, while another says found dead in his cabin with bullet wounds. Some just say hanged or legally hanged. But the main reason this cemetery has become the stuff of legend, its often humorous take on death. The name Boot Hill was never used until the mid-1920s. One grave marker famously reads, "Here lies Lester Moore. 4 slugs from a 44. No less, no more." Others imply a certain savagery of the time, like the one indicating two women who came to murderous blows over a man, or another that marks the grave of a man who simply died in a dispute. Since many of the original grave markers were wooden, very few remnants have actually remained throughout the graveyard. Most of what visitors see now are recreations of the originals for the sake of being able to be read and allowing the continuation of the historical mystique. But a few of the stone markers still stand proudly in the Sonoran desert sun, reminding all who visit there of what once was. Boot Hill isn't Tombstone's first cemetery, but it's Tombstone's most notorious, named for those buried with their boots on. Travelers report spectral shadows, strange lights, and spooky sounds. In Boot Hill's gift shop, merchandise is inexplicably misplaced, disturbed, and disheveled. The sweatshirt rack rotates on its own, untouched by human hands. Photographs reveal apparitions unseen to the naked eye. Billy Clanton is the most popular spirit said to rise from his grave every night. He meanders throughout Tombstone, packing his pistol. Tombstone's godfather is another internment, though her phantom is often referred to as the Lady in Red. That's right, the godfather is a woman. Other witnesses, unidentified ghosts above unmarked graves. Another one's the ghost of China Mary. The image of a woman in red is sometimes spotted at Boot Hill. Locals believe her to be China Mary, a significant figure in Tombstone history. Mary, or Sing Choi, was an astute businesswoman who operated Tombstone's general store and controlled Tombstone's opium dens. Mary supplied hops to the women of Tombstone's red light district, serving as a godfather to Tombstone's community. She was a generous woman known for her kindness as well as her compassion. Mary died of a heart attack in 1906. She was interred at Boot Hill. Is that why she frequents the burying ground today? Is she Tombstone's woman in red? Here's a little whispers from an unmarked grave. One journalist once overheard a strange small voice. The journalist had stopped at an unmarked grave where he could make out a tenuous whisper. "It was nice of you to do that." Startled, the journalist stepped back. He assumed that he had been mistaken with that sound. Yet, once the journalist stepped forward once more, the voice again spoke. "You came back. You must like to play with me a lot." The voice sounded confident yet childlike. But it was when the voice began to laugh that the journalist panicked. He detected a human-like shadow from the corner of his eye, a spectral figure snaking through the stones. The journalist was dumbstruck, shell-shocked. The ghost disappeared, and the unmarked grave was all that remains. And there's a little bit about Tombstone's Boot Hill Cemetery in Tombstone, Arizona.
Hey, you know what? Tombstone is my favorite movie of all time. My second favorite movie would probably have to be Young Guns. So I did some digging, and I found this little story about Billy the Kid. The old Courthouse of Lincoln has seen its fair share of historic happenings, from the Murphy and Dolan store to being turned into a courthouse and a jail, which held Billy the Kid for a little while. It's hardly surprising that visitors and locals alike have experienced something strange in this place. The narrow staircase leading up to what was once Murphy's bedroom and was later turned into the room that held the kid has had visitors reportedly feeling very cold and a sensation of someone touching their hair. Fairly recently, these stairs also revealed a grisly reminder of the building's past. The top stair, when removed, had traces of a good deal of blood. Could this be Deputy James Bell's blood that was shed during the struggle with Billy the Kid? Or maybe the blood belongs to one of the unfortunate men who crossed Murphy or Dolan when the building was still the house. Perhaps the ghostly breeze upon the stairs knows the answer. Upstairs is the room that was used as Billy's prison during his stay. Many have heard the distinct sound of chains scraping across the floor and other noises of heavy restraints being moved. Could this be Billy having a little fun? Or another prisoner who was held there? Outside in the growing twilight, it's not hard to see why many folks claim that the building gives them an eerie vibe. People have reported the feeling of being watched constantly as they pass the courthouse or sit out on the porch enjoying the evening air. A few have seen a strange shadowed figure moving around on the second floor. It seems to stare out of one of the windows as if watching the observer intently. It is described as a black mass, an outline of an upper body of a person.
One of the areas that's on my bucket list to go visit, and I think one of the creepiest and most haunted areas of the world, is New Orleans. And I want to talk a little bit about St. Louis Cemetery number 1 and its most famous inhabitant. So St. Louis Cemetery number 1 was established in 1789 and remains the oldest cemetery that locals and tourists can visit. It's also considered one of the most haunted cemeteries in all of the United States. In the span of just one block, this burial ground holds over 700 tombs and over 100,000 of the dead and counting, as it is still an active gravesite. Is it any surprise that it's rumored to be very haunted? For over 200 years, there have been reports of people having run-ins with ghosts that still call St. Louis Cemetery number 1 home. Many people have been tempted to try and access this haunted cemetery after dark, to try and make contact with the ghosts which haunt St. Louis Cemetery after dark. We can't say we recommend this method of venturing to see the ghosts, although St. Louis Cemetery number 1's eerie facade is enticing. Even the appearance of the cemetery bolsters the illusion of days gone by, to say nothing of the eerily quiet atmosphere that descends over St. Louis number 1 as dusk falls and night begins its reign. Its age is prominently displayed by the character of the cemetery. Broken shells and cobblestones form the alleys, and the crumbling, chipped, above-ground crypts hold the dead. The disorderly layout of the tombs and burial plots are a labyrinth that only ghosts of the cemetery are able to navigate. Many of the family tombs bear cryptic symbols, as well as signs of vandalism and old age. It is no wonder that many people feel a ghostly presence when visiting New Orleans' oldest cemetery. And it is no wonder that many movie productions particularly ache to film within the cemetery's white walls, although Easy Rider and Interview with the Vampire are perhaps the most famous films shot inside by far. Why is St. Louis Cemetery number 1 haunted? Good question. After all, we have found that despite popular belief, cemeteries tend not to be very haunted. After all, when you die, we're sure there are at least 100 more places you'd rather hang out than the cemetery in which you were buried. Despite this, for almost 200 years, ghost stories have surrounded St. Louis Cemetery number 1. People have had encounters with the dead who are still buried inside the stone walls of this historic cemetery. So let's take a look at the most famous person to haunt these hallowed grounds. Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen. The most famous ghost which is seen within St. Louis Cemetery is that of Marie Laveau, commonly known as the Voodoo Queen. Marie was born in 1801 and would become the most revered and at times feared voodoo practitioner in New Orleans history. She practiced fortune-telling, the occult, and worked on herbal remedies. As awareness of Marie's skills and powers spread throughout the population, her fame grew and gained unimaginable strength. Legend has it that she knew all the secrets of all the levels of society. No doubt she did, as hordes of people fawned over her, begging her for help to help them with their problems or to assist them in their own rituals and spells. She was quite literally the go-to voodoo practitioner in New Orleans during the 19th century. The ghost of Marie Laveau has been spotted in many locations throughout the French Quarter, including meandering down the street past her old house at 1022 St. Anne Street. She's most recognizable by the red and white turban tucked around her hair and by the brilliantly colored clothes she wears, but even as people follow her, she disappears, vanishes right from sight. Within the cemetery, individuals have reported seeing the ghost of Marie Laveau walking through the tombs, and for those willing and risking to disregard her or her beliefs or religion, reports exist of people being scratched, pinched, or shoved down to the ground. Marie, as they say, is not always deemed the friendliest of spirits.
The haunted Greenwood Cemetery. Founded in 1880, the 82-acre Greenwood Cemetery is the final resting place for some of Orlando's most prominent families. Greenwood, once aptly named the Orlando Cemetery, is the city's first and oldest cemetery, so it makes sense that the site would be home to a number of ghostly apparitions. Before Greenwood was established, Orlando had no formal burial grounds, nor proper record keeping for the dead, leading to countless lost graves.
Jamaica has their fair share of strange and spooky legends. Let's check out some of Jamaica's most enduring scary stories and legends. A duppy is a type of ghost or spirit native to Jamaica. While described as the souls of dead people, duppies have much in common with old-world shapeshifters and roadside tricksters. They may be found in bamboo thickets and cottonwood groves and feed on bamboo, duppy pumpkin, and strangler figs. Duppies appear from 7 in the evening till 5 in the morning, and sometimes at noon. Duppy activities range from simple mischief to arson, beating, burning, poisoning, and stoning, but they are powerless against twins and those born with a caul. That's the C-A-U-L word. A left-handed crack with a tarred whip and the burning of certain herbs also keep them away. Some of the more dangerous duppies include 3-foot horse, whose breath is poison and which can outrun anything, but which cannot attack those in the shadow of trees. Then there is Whooping Boy, who rides 3-foot horse while whooping loudly. Long Bubby Susan has pendulous breasts that reach the ground, and which she throws over her shoulders. Old Hidge, the witch, is fond of abducting children, but can be confounded by rice thrown on the doorstep. The duppy cannot count above 3, but is compelled to count the grains anyway. Then there is Rolling Calf, one of the worst and most feared duppies. Rolling, in this context, means roaming, as in rolling through town. It is a shapeshifter that can appear in a number of disguises. The best known is that of a hornless goat, black or white or spotted, with a corresponding caprin stench. One of its front legs is human, the other is that of a horse, and the 2 hind legs are those of a goat. Its tail curls over its back. Its eyes are red and glow like blazing fires. Flames come from its nostrils. There's a collar on its neck with a chain that drags on the ground and rattles ominously. The rolling calf can also appear as a cat, dog, pig, goat, bull, or horse, with the brindled cat form being the particularly dangerous. It can be as small as a cat or as big as a bull. A rolling calf is the soul of a particularly wicked person. Butchers and murderers return as rolling calves. They also are found in bamboo and cottonwood, as well as caves and abandoned houses. They come out on moonless nights in search of sugar. They are very fond of molasses, and they break into the cattle pens. Rolling calves can wreak all sorts of evil and blow bad breath on their victims. Heavens to Betsy. But they can be warded off in a number of ways. Flogging them with a tarred whip always helps, as does sticking an open knife into the ground. Even more useful is the fact that rolling calves are terrified of the moon to a comical extent. But whatever method is used to escape a rolling calf's clutches, you would be well advised to leave the premises at once. The rolling calf will return with a vengeance. I want to stay out of Jamaica at night, fellas.
From Jamaica, we take a little cruise to Cuba. Imagine the most beautiful whitewashed Spanish-Cuban villa. Everything is picture perfect, and you can softly hear an old-fashioned typewriter clacking away somewhere. But where is it? And who uses typewriters anymore? You are at Finca Vigia, the Cuban home of writer Ernest Hemingway. Today, the home is a museum for the famous writer. Thousands of tourists flock to see the artifacts and to be near where the author spent his days. And his spirit may be there still. Staff reports hearing a typewriter, but always in another room, and they go to look to find no one there. Guests also report smelling cigar smoke.
The Chase Family Vault in Christchurch Parish, Barbados. Unsolved mysteries abound throughout history, but for the people of Barbados, there are few tales quite as enduring as that of the Chase Family Vault. Located in the Sunny Island Range, the family vault has brought with it a number of strange events and nightmarish tales, all without seeming to come to any sort of closure. Buried beneath one of the country's most treasured historical sites, the Christchurch Parish Cemetery, the family vault lies in wait, bringing with it a whole lot of strange activity. The Chase family have a long and winding history with Barbados, after having initially bought their family vault in the 1800s, located on a hill overlooking the rest of the Caribbean. The vault was chosen for its picturesque views and calming surroundings, serving as the perfect memorial site for the family. Despite being battered by the salt and wind from the island storms, the vault was sturdy and strong, protecting the family members buried inside behind a huge blue marble slab. While they might have had everything they wanted in life, the Chase family were not popular with the local community. Incredibly wealthy, they used their riches to manipulate the people around them, treating staff and slaves with unprecedented brutality. When the family came to buy the vault, they purchased it from another owner, believing it would suit their family better. By the time the first family member, James Elliott Chase, came to be buried in the vault, they already knew that another woman from a different family was already lying in rest within. Despite this, the family went ahead with the burial, and not long after his death, they sealed James Elliott Chase in the large stone tomb. He wasn't alone for long, however, and just a few months after his death, he was joined by the body of a newborn baby who died suddenly after birth. Not long after this, another member of the family, Dorcas Chase, committed suicide and was buried alongside her family members in the resting place. All three had been placed in heavy iron coffins, which, due to their size, require a number of strong men in order to be put in place. Things were only destined to get worse for the Chase family, however. Following the sudden suicide of Dorcas Chase, her father had followed the same fate. Evidently deeply unhappy with the way of life, buried in a huge iron casket, Thomas Chase was put to rest alongside his other family members, sealed in the vault until after death caused it to be reopened. Following the string of deaths in the family, things started to take a bizarre twist. When maintenance laborers entered the family vault, having moved the huge marble slab in order to get in, they found that Dorcas Chase's coffin had been moved, turned upside down, and balanced against a wall. Despite this, however, the coffin had not been opened. Alongside the casket of the youngest family member, it had simply been repositioned in the vault, an act that would have required a number of strong individuals to carry off. The family, however, was not concerned by the activity, attributing it to vandals. The coffins were shifted back to their original spots, and the vault was resealed in order to ensure such activity did not happen again. When the next family member died, some years later, however, the Chase family stumbled right back into the same story again, slowly coming to realize that something very strange was underfoot. The coffins had once again been rearranged inside the tomb. Each coffin had been haphazardly flung around inside with no evidence that any of them had been broken into. The second discovery soon spread throughout the town, piquing the interest of a number of townspeople. People began to speculate what was happening, attributing the actions to black magic, voodoo, and even a family curse. Over the years, the vault was found in disarray each time it was reopened, leading to a wide-scale investigation by one of the family members. Each of the tomb was discovered displaced, except that of one family member who had been put to rest in a lighter wood coffin. In a last-ditch attempt to stop the break-ins, one family member had the vault set with mortar, covered with cement, and finished off with fine sand so as to be able to detect footprints. 8 months later, he opened up the tomb and found it just as he had left it, unharmed. Since this time, there had been no more disruption to the family tomb, but the legend still lives on in Barbados. The story is passed around campfires and family homes, nonetheless intriguing locals as to what could have happened down in the vault all those years ago. Very scary.
Next, our journey takes us to Portugal, the small castle of São Joao in Estoril, known locally as the Castelino de São Joao do Estoril. This small castle by the ocean has been on the housing market several times, but many interested parties changed their minds after visiting. As the story goes, a girl threw herself off the cliffs near the estate. Since then, a few individuals have mentioned seeing a small girl and feeling an urge to jump off the cliffs while visiting the property.
So, Alcatraz in San Francisco, California. Located a few miles off the coast of San Francisco, Alcatraz is perhaps the most infamous prison in American history. The maximum security penitentiary system was initially built in the 19th century to house war criminals. Later, in the 1930s, it was converted into a federal prison where the worst felons in the country were sent to do their time. Some famous Alcatraz inmates include Al Capone and Robert Birdman Stroud. Throughout its years of operation, tales of torture and abuse plagued Alcatraz, and it became known as the one prison where no one was ever able to escape alive. Even before Alcatraz closed in 1963, guards had already reported hearing strange noises and witnessing supernatural sights in the middle of the night. Since then, visitors and rangers have continued to claim the prison is haunted by the spirits of former inmates, including Capone, whose banjo music has been heard coming from the shower where he used to play. Today, visitors can experience the eeriness of Alcatraz by taking a tour of its facilities and stepping into one of the prison's solitary confinement cells, which inexplicably remains freezing cold even during the warmest summer months. It's worth the trip, even if you only have one day in San Francisco.
The castle in Beaufort, South Carolina. Beaufort's most recognizable antebellum mansion is also one of the South Carolina town's most haunted. Though construction began in the 1850s, the house was only partially finished when it was commandeered in 1861 as a Civil War military hospital. An outbuilding behind the house served as the hospital's morgue, and bodies are rumored to be interred on the home's extensive grounds. After the house finished construction, following the war's end, supernatural sightings began. Among the spirits occupying the property is Gauche, a French dwarf jester that came to the area in the 16th century. In the past, he reportedly joined a young girl who lived in the home for tea parties and wandered the grounds in full sight of gardeners and visitors. If you want to see it for yourself, the castle is privately owned, but occasionally opens for tours and events.
Here's a nice little tale about a haunted doll. When you think of haunted dolls, it's likely the creepy old Victorian-looking porcelain kind that springs to mind. None of which you probably have laying around. Still, don't get too comfortable around any kids' toys too soon. Disney's Frozen Elsa doll that was gifted for Christmas 2013 in the Houston area made headlines earlier this year when it seemingly became haunted. The doll recited phrases from the movie Frozen and sang Let It Go when a button on its necklace was pressed. For 2 years, it did that in English, the mother, Emily Madonia, said. In 2015, it started doing it alternating between Spanish and English. There wasn't a button that changed these, it was just random. The family had owned the doll for more than 6 years and never changed its batteries. The mother said the doll would randomly begin to speak and sing even though the switch was turned off. The family decided to throw the creepy doll out in December 2019. Weeks later, they found it inside a bench in their living room. The kids insisted they didn't put it there, and I believe them because they wouldn't have dug through the garbage outside. At that point, Elsa ceased to sing the English rendition of Let It Go altogether, speaking only Spanish when pressed. The family then double-bagged the bizarre doll and placed it at the bottom of their garbage, which was taken out on the garbage day. They went on a trip shortly after, but when they returned, Elsa too had come back and was waiting in the backyard of their home. This time, the family mailed Elsa to a family friend in Minnesota who taped the haunted doll to the front bumper of his truck. It doesn't seem to have made its way back to Houston yet, as per Madonia's latest update on the creepy doll.
I found several famous celebrity haunted dolls, but I found this one that I wasn't familiar with. Palau Ubin Haunted Doll in Palau Ubin, northeast Singapore. The story starts off in 1914 during World War I. Supposedly, the British arrested a German couple in Singapore they presumed were spies. The couple's daughter ran off and managed to get away, only to plunge off a steep cliff in Palau Ubin and crash to her death. Natives constructed a monument in her memory with a porcelain altar and a Barbie doll that reportedly contains her crucifix. The doll, it is said, holds the child's spirit and soul. The effigy, some claim, is haunted, and over time, it has become a local deity. The doll, benevolent in nature, helps out the community and guards them against ill fortune. Every year, a festival is held, and offerings are made to the doll.
Howdy Individuals, I found some ghost stories online that claim to be true. So it's Michelle Young had a strange experience with her 2-year-old daughter. Michelle says, "When my daughter was 2, I found her twirling paper towel tubes tied with twine in the air. I asked her what she was doing. She said she was practicing her nunchucks. I was very confused as she had no way of knowing what they were. I asked her what she meant, and she said that Adam had told her how to make them and showed her each night how to use them. She went on to say Adam told her to practice because she may need to know how to defend herself one day. I almost freaked out, but asked her what Adam looked like. She said he was tall, blonde, and had blue eyes. She said, 'Mommy, you know how he looks. You know him. He died of a headache.' I had to leave the room. You see, 4 months before she was even born, my tall, blonde, blue-eyed martial arts pro friend had died of a brain aneurysm at the age of 27. She has not spoken of him since that day, so I'm not sure if I scared her with my reaction or if she had completed her lessons."
The Hoya Forest in Romania. Warped trees fill this forest. There are skeletal figures twisting and spiraling, making it seem as though they're contorting themselves to reach out and touch you. An eerie silence fills the air, interrupted only by the footsteps of unseen figures. Given its eerie atmosphere, it's no wonder the Hoya Forest is said to be one of the most haunted forests in the world. As such, it's a place that lends well to stories steeped with darkness. Some even call it the Bermuda Triangle of Romania. According to local legends, ghosts and spirits lurk among the crooked trees. One tale tells of a young girl who disappeared into the forest, only to reappear 5 years later, unable to remember where she had been. Another legend speaks of a shepherd who, along with his sheep, vanished within the woods. And with most places associated with the supernatural, there are also rumors of alien encounters. Yeah, I'm going to Romania.
This one's called "There's Someone Under the Bed." Sometimes the very short ghost stories are the best. And this tale tells the story of a father putting his young son to bed. I begin tucking him into bed, and he tells me, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." I look underneath for his amusement and see him, another him under the bed, staring back at me, quivering and whispering, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed."
Ghosts on a tin roof. I'm a nighttime tour guide at an old convict prison in Australia. Hey, this could have been in our Australian Urban Legends episode. Maybe. It's run by the government, so the tours are pretty watered down and family friendly. The tours run between like 6 and 9 on Wednesday and Friday nights. And some of the scariest stuff I've ever experienced has happened there. I'm not convinced in ghosts or whatnot, but if there are, they're definitely there. Every person who works there has their own creepy story. My scariest is when I had a group of about 30 people in the gallows one night, the room where people were hanged. And the room is made up of corrugated tin, so I was there doing my bit when suddenly there was this huge bang on the roof, and everyone looked up, and a few people screamed, but a lot laughed. We have a few actors that jump out on tours, so they probably thought it was that. The banging didn't stop though. It was kind of irregular at sort of like half-second intervals, like boom, 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 boom. and people were getting creeped, me included. So I took the group outside, and now the roof of the room is a slanted A-frame. So if you walk back a bit, you can see the outside roof. And we all watched as this one bit of tin looked like it was being stomped from the outside. Moving and everything. Still banging when I took the group to the next spot. We finished off the tour, and a few people thought it was a joke, but it genuinely terrified me.
This one's called The Ghost at Home. In one of our favorite short ghost stories, a man thinks that he loses his phone and someone is playing a trick on him. Turns out there is someone playing with him, but it's a ghoul rather than a person. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at, the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered, gave out a low, raspy giggle, and then hung up. They didn't answer again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and headed home. I found my phone lying on my nightstand right where I left it.
Oh man, that's creepy. You're not supposed to answer. My old coworker had a son that was in his mid-30s, and he had a son named Hunter. It was about 4 or 5. She said that Hunter would have bad dreams and that he would sleep with his dad when he got scared. One night his dad woke up because he heard Hunter calling him. But he was calling him by his name, not Dad. So he went to his room and he was asleep. He woke him and said, "Hunter, were you calling me? Is everything okay?" And Hunter said, "Dad, when they call you, you're not supposed to answer." And then fell back asleep. He asked him about it in the morning, but he said he didn't remember saying it.
How about this one's called The Chair? This short story starts benignly enough with a friendly-seeming ghost playing with children. But when you learn the origins of the ghost and just why the ghost is moving the object around the room, it quickly gets a lot creepier. When my sister Betsy and I were kids, our family lived for a while in a charming old farmhouse. We loved exploring its dusty corners and climbing the apple tree in the backyard. But our favorite thing was the ghost. We called her Mother because she seemed so kind and nurturing. Some mornings, Betsy and I would wake up, and on each of our nightstands, we'd find a cup that hadn't been there the night before. Mother had left them there, worried that we'd get thirsty during the night. She just wanted to take care of us. Among the home's original furnishings was an antique wooden chair, which we kept against the back wall of the living room. Whenever we were preoccupied watching TV or playing a game, Mother would inch that chair forward across the room towards us. Sometimes she'd manage to move it all the way to the center of the room. We always felt sad putting it back against the wall. Mother just wanted to be near us. Years later, long after we'd moved out, I found an old newspaper article about the farmhouse's original occupant, a widow. She murdered her 2 children by giving them each a cup of poisoned milk before bed. Then she hung herself. The article includes a photo of the farmhouse's living room with a woman's body hanging from a beam. Beneath her, knocked over, was that old wooden chair placed exactly in the center of the room.
In related news, when I was 7, I woke up in the middle of the night with an earache. I decided to tell my mom and stepdad, and I walked out of my room. Someone was sitting on the chair in the living room, about 3 feet away from my bedroom door. The person looked strange. The face was kind of distorted. But it was dark and I couldn't see well. "Mom?" I asked. and the person shook their head, and I started getting scared. Mike? It'd be even funnier if there was no one named Mike in the house. The person shook their head again, and I decided the best course of action was to go back to bed, so I wouldn't have to walk past this person. I climbed in bed and closed my eyes for a second before opening them and seeing the person standing in my doorway, smiling madly and nodding furiously. I screamed at the top of my lungs and closed my eyes, and my stepdad came running out of his room in his underwear with a baseball bat. That was a scary sight in itself. And there was nothing there but clothes that my mom had folded and put on the chair or strewn about the living room. For the longest time I told myself it was my cat sitting on my clothes.
This story is called The Boy with No Eyes. One night when I was 10, I was woken up by my bedroom door opening, followed by someone sitting on my bed. I felt my leg grazed and the bed sink under a person's weight. It's just Mom, I thought, and I opened my eyes. It was not my mom. I found an eyeless boy. He had black, empty sockets. He was about my age, sitting at the foot of my bed. He extended his hand, and in it was a little box. I was startled, but reached out. He pulled back. I reached again and said, "Give it." Brave little kid. Then I blinked, and when I reopened my eyes, he was gone. But I could still see the imprint where he'd sat on my bed. Fast forward 5 years, my girlfriend came over to do homework. After she finished, she took a nap while she waited for her parents. When they arrived, I tried waking her up. She opened her eyes suddenly, looking up at the corner where the wall meets the ceiling. She pointed there and went back to sleep. I shook her again. She came to full consciousness, and I explained what she had done. She looked haunted. Up on the wall, I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there, in a Spider-Man pose, staring at me. I freaked out and told her my story about the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years. I was with the same girlfriend and had a 2-year-old. We were living in my parents' house in my old room. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night, and she'd talk. After a while, I noticed she almost had the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her once who she was talking to. She said, "It's a little boy. He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." My daughter's nightly conversations continued until we got our own place later that year. I was looking for some kind of cool ending to that one. Oh, they all don't end happily.
This one is called The Haunted Truck. I used to have a truck that I swore had the ghost of a dead baby in it. I used to get home late from my job as a dishwasher, and after I parked and was sitting in my driveway with the engine off, I would hear this really faint sound of a baby crying. Late at night, when it was quiet, it used to make my arm hair stand on end. I used to get home and hop out of the car in fear of hearing it. One night I decided to sit there and just listen, try to pinpoint the sound. Eventually I discovered that it was indeed not a dead baby, but when I undid my seat buckle, the old spring of the seatbelt retractor would slowly start pulling the belt in, creating a faint noise that sounded like wailing. Boo! That was a letdown.
This one already has me scared just by looking at the title. The Legend of Huggin Molly. This one comes out of Alabama. Generations of Abbeville children have listened wide-eyed to their parents tell the story of Huggin Molly. They have hurried home on nights lit only by the moon's glow, certain they saw something in the shadows, afraid she would be around the next corner. Versions of who Huggin Molly was vary, but one frequent description depicts her as a giant of a woman, maybe 7 feet tall and as big around as a bale of cotton. Some say her ghost still walks the streets of Abbeville late in the night, sweeping her black skirt as she goes. If she happens upon you, she chases you down, gives you a big hug, and screams in your ear. Kind of like my grandma. Jimmy Rain, an Abbeville native and lifelong resident, grew up hearing the legend of Hugging Molly. For him and his friends, she was as real as the trees that rustled in the wind at night. Anybody who grew up in Abbeville grew up knowing the legend of Huggin Molly, Jimmy says. If your mother or dad didn't want you to be out after dark, they'd tell you Huggin Molly would get you, and you believed it too. One night, Jimmy and his good friend Tommy Murphy heard the story from Tommy's dad. He told them he knew Huggin Molly was real because she had sprung from the shadows and hugged him one night. They were convinced it had to be true. To this day, hearts beat faster as the moon rises in the sky over Abbeville. Huggin Molly, dressed all in black, could show up at any time. Ooh.
And that's going to do it for our Haunted World, Chapter 1. Hey, we appreciate you listening. If you've got a story to tell you'd like to hear featured on Chapter 2, you can send us an email to indarkplacespod@hotmail.com. We'll see you again next week. God bless you guys.